Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the latest episode of Talk and Stalk, your unholy home for horror. I'm your host, as always, Barry. Today, I'm going to do things a little differently. Now, typically, I'm an audio-only kind of guy. I don't particularly like my face being out and about, but I'm sure you're all horror fans that are listening, so I'm sure you've seen a lot worse faces than this. Yeah, this is actually my first solo video for the channel. And I'm hoping, fingers crossed, I don't want to jinx it, I'm hoping all goes well. So basically what I'm going to be doing for this video is basically just listing and talking about, quite briefly, because there's quite a few films to get through. So I'm going to try and keep this as short and sweet as possible, are my top 10 horror films of the 1970s. Now, the 70s was a great decade for horror, in my opinion. It may actually be my favourite decade, very closely followed by the 80s. I think the 70s is when we really started to see a lot of contemporary horror being churned out. A lot of films that within this period went on to achieve cult and classic status. And as I said, the 80s is very, very close behind this for me. So now I had to try and keep this to 10. So there are some great classic horror films from the 70s that didn't quite get into my top 10. Just remember, this is my personal top 10. Okay. We've all got our own opinions and all that. If we all like the same films and that, the world would be a boring place. So some of the films, just some honourable mentions, some of the films, I'm not really going to go in depth with any of these, but these are films that were close to my top 10 and would certainly be in my top 20. Were films like Invasion of the Body Snatchers in 78, The Omen, the original 76, The Tenant, also 76, obviously directed by and starring Roman Polanski, Salem's Lot, 79, The Wicker Man. All of these films were very close to being in my top 10. The Hills Have Eyes would probably be in my top 20 as well. But yeah, so just going to jump into the list now. Now, in the 10th spot for me is Don't Look Now, released in 73. As far as I'm concerned, one of the greatest psychological horror films of all time. It's a film that I love. I just love the sense of dread that permeates this film, the great atmosphere it has. They make great use of the setting of Venice. It obviously stars Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie, and it has one of the most unforgettable climaxes, I think, in the history of horror. So Don't Look Now, great psychological horror film. That's in the 10th spot for me. Now, at number 9 is a zombie film that really needs no introduction, and that, of course, is Dawn of the Dead. George A. Romero, released in 78. Such an iconic zombie film. I mean, Night of the Living Dead in 68 is probably still my all-time favorite zombie film. It really set the template for the zombie genre to follow. And Dawn of the Dead is clearly a bigger film, a bigger budget. Such a great movie. It makes obviously a lot of commentary about consumerism, and one of the most iconic zombie films out there, without a doubt. And I'm not actually ashamed to admit, but I do actually like the 2004 remake, Zack Snyder's directorial debut. As horror movie remakes go, it is one of the better examples out there, in my opinion. Now, at number 8 is Carrie. 1976, Stephen King's first novel, in fact, and the first to actually be adapted for the big screen. Very definitely directed by Brian De Palma. Sissy Spacek, Oscar-nominated performance, fantastic performance from Pippa Laurie as well, that obviously plays her mum. Great score. And Carrie, Stephen King has actually said he doesn't see it as a horror movie, it's a coming-of-age tale. It's still to this day, released in 1976, as I say, but it's still one of the very best Stephen King adaptations out there, in my opinion. Now, so that was at number 8. Now, for number 7, Suspiria. Personally, my favorite David Argento film. I love this movie. I love the whole kind of very surrealistic, dreamlike quality that this film has. Argento makes great use of color. It has some really effective set pieces. Love the score by Goblin. And just to quickly get back to Carrie, I love the score in that film as well by Pino Donaggio. Fantastic score. And obviously that film has like, a hell of a jump scare ending, which I'm sure had popcorn flying back in 1976. So, now the next on the list would actually be Black Christmas, which to me is still one of the greatest slasher movies of all time. It wasn't the commercial success that Halloween was, but this is a film that does have a large cult following and an ardent fan base, and deservedly so. It's still an effectively scary film now, released in 74. Love the sense of atmosphere, love the air of mystery. The killer in this movie, to me, is probably the scariest killer in the history of slasher movies. I just love the fact that you see very little of the killer. The telephone calls are disturbing. So, Black Christmas. Unless I'm losing track here, I'm pretty certain that's at number 6. So at number 5 for me would actually be the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, again, a horror film that really needs no introduction, has a real raw, visceral quality to it. Released in the same year as Black Christmas, released in 74. A proto-slasher film, if you will, a very documentary-style kind of quality to it that only adds to the film's power. And that's where much of the impact of the movie actually lies, in the way in which this film is filmed. It's very cerebral, absolute. And of course, we got a horror icon with Leatherface in this movie. So, okay, at number 4 now, this is where it was getting tough, okay? Because if you ask me maybe a few weeks from now where I'd place these, I'll admit, there might be some of these films I'd kind of shuffle about a little bit. My top 5 was very, very hard. But at number 4 is The Exorcist. I know some people would actually expect it to be higher. I do. It is one of my favorite horror movies of all time, certainly. And it's easy to see why this film caused such a huge impact upon release. It was released at the end of 1973, obviously caused a lot of controversy, but was a huge box office success, highest grossing horror film for a long time. I believe 2017's It actually became the new record holder. It's just a film, even now, I think for a film that's nearly 50 years old, it still holds up remarkably well. Great movie. And, it's the granddaddy of demonic possession films. Great score. Tubular Bells, of course, has pretty much become iconic because of that movie. We're now basically up to the top 3. Now, this is where it was really tough. In the 3rd spot for me is Jaws. Jaws is, to me, almost like the granddaddy of kind of contemporary monster movies. Jaws, I know some people out there say that Jaws isn't a horror movie. I can understand that, but to me, it has enough elements to it to be considered a horror film. I think at its core, Jaws is a monster movie, but in this case, Jaws, the monster being a great white shark, obviously became a huge box office success. The iconic score, instantly iconic score from John Williams. It's very deftly directed by Steven Spielberg. This is the film that really put him on the map. Now, there is a film that almost got in the top 10, and that was Duel, which I'll admit was extremely close to being in the top 10. Duel, again, is a film that proved that Spielberg could do suspense, 4 years before he hit the big time with Jaws. But what elevates Jaws above any kind of like monster movie, if you will, is the great direction, the great characters, the cast, just a great movie. So we're basically down to the last 2 now. And this is where it was really hard. Number 2 is Alien, released in 1979, sci-fi horror classic. Essentially a slasher movie in space. I think the alien, the xenomorph, is actually one of the greatest horror creations out there, created by H.R. Geiger. I love the sense of claustrophobia and suspense this film has. A great film. Little fact, I'm sure a lot of people know, it was originally going to be called Star Beast, which just screams B-movie, really, doesn't it? Alien. Now, I'll admit, Alien was very, very close to being number 1. It really was. I did put it at number 1 at one point. But at number 1 for me is Halloween. Now, Now, I'll admit, Black Christmas to me is a scarier movie. I absolutely love Black Christmas. I think I just love the very deft direction. It's directed with a lot of finesse. You know, Halloween is a film that has the simplest of concepts, really, but it's so perfectly executed. The score, courtesy of John Carpenter, the emphasis on suspense and atmosphere. In the original Halloween, Michael Myers is very much the boogeyman. I love that whole kind of stalking aspect. Obviously, it took Jamie Lee Curtis to stardom. It was her big breakthrough. You know, Donald Pleasance, a very established British actor. I'm sure, again, a little fact, I'm sure a lot of people realize, but Christopher Lee was originally offered the role and actually turned it down and said it was the biggest regret of his career. So Halloween is a film that I have a soft spot for, certainly. It's a film that really introduced me to the world of slasher movies, and it was certainly, you know, a very influential film. Even though Black Christmas came before it, it was definitely the commercial success of Halloween that really helped to propel this, to help popularize and kickstart the slasher subgenre. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's my top 10. As I said, there's a lot of other great 70s horror films out there. And yeah, thanks a lot to everyone that listened. And I hope you like what you've heard. And I'll be back again soon to haunt you and torment you. Take care.